At the height of the Vietnam War, a U.S. Special Forces camp is overrun in a fierce armored attack. 8 Green Berets are trapped inside an underground bunker. Their only hope of survival, their fellow Green Berets. Outmanned and outgunned, a small band of commandos plot a daring rescue mission. It will take patience, cunning, and courage to get past the enemy. The lives of 8 men depend on it. In an era of global violence, a new breed of warrior has emerged to counter the threat. Superbly trained, fearless, and equipped with massive firepower, these men are an elite few. Their teams are hand-picked, their operations covert, their missions deadly. From around the globe, these are the untold stories of the Special Forces. On January 31st, 1968, North Vietnam violated a truce during Tet, the Vietnamese New Year. The NVA, or North Vietnamese Army, launched shock attacks on several key cities and provinces in South Vietnam. Within 24 hours, the U.S. Embassy in Saigon had fallen to enemy invaders. Khe Sanh, a U.S. Marine base just south of the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, was pounded by NVA artillery. The NVA gunners struck with incredible precision. A direct hit on an ammo dump wiped out 90% of Khe Sanh's stores. President Lyndon Johnson was determined to hold the strategic base. If Khe Sanh fell, the enemy would cross the DMZ and carry the fight into the populated coastal regions of South Vietnam. Johnson ordered the 6,600 Marines stationed at Khe Sanh to prepare for one of the largest battles of the war. Caught in the crosshairs of the invasion was a small Special Forces camp called Lang Vei. 24 Green Berets operated out of the forward border camp. Their mission, to train and lead 400 indigenous South Vietnamese troops on covert operations. Franklin Dooms was a radio operator at Lang Vei.
Well, we were primarily force multipliers. That means that we would take 12 men and train thousands, if need be, to conduct operations.
The South Vietnamese troops who fought alongside the Green Berets were from the Civilian Irregular Defense Guard, or SIDG. For these local soldiers, the war was personal. They had to protect their homes and families from the NVA. By day, the Green Berets trained the SIDG in modern combat. By night, they led them on recon patrols into hostile territory.
Our job was to monitor infiltration from North Vietnam. We were more of a reconnaissance type unit to keep people informed as to what's going on the borders of Laos and North Vietnam border.
Operating deep within enemy territory, the Green Berets were prime targets. They never wore rank insignia or dog tags, and they removed any personal effects that could be exploited by enemy propaganda. The risk of death or capture was extremely high. The patrols were under constant attack. Sergeant Richard Allen was a combat medic stationed at Lang Vei.
Every day we'd send a patrol out, they would come in contact with the NVA. So it was every day. If you sent anybody in any given direction, there was an immediate response with the NVA.
Lang Vei's covert mission made it a priority for enemy troops. First Lieutenant Paul Longrear was stationed at Lang Vei twice. He understood the strategic importance of the camp.
It had a history of launching patrols into secret areas or classified areas, and it was a place that harassed the enemy, and they wanted to get rid of it.
As the Tet invasion intensified, the NVA focused on Khe Sanh, but Lang Vei's vulnerability became more apparent to Staff Sergeant Dennis Thompson as each day passed.
If you looked at the situation map, there was Khe Sanh Combat Base, Hill 861, Hill 881 north and south, and Lang Vei in blue, and everything around it was in red. All that's, you write up the enemy units in red. And if you looked at that map, there were just a few little blue spots in this sea of red.
The situation was becoming critical. Khe Sanh Marine Combat Base was assigned to protect Lang Vei in the event of an attack. But Khe Sanh was in trouble. 20,000 enemy troops were closing in on their perimeter. Lang Vei went on high alert. Sergeant Thompson led a recon patrol of Siege troops a few miles from camp. As they neared the Hai Pong River, the patrol found something that would change the course of the entire war.
We found underwater bridges. You know, they pile the rocks up underwater. So they're about 6 or 8 inches below the water, but it's a roadway to support a heavy vehicle.
Thompson searched for tracks. He needed to know what kind of vehicles had been using the secret roadway. On the banks of the river, he found an infantryman's worst nightmare: the distinct imprint of tank tracks. If tanks were running in their sector, Lang Vei would be their prime target. They had nothing in their camp to defend against heavy armor. Sergeant Thompson returned to Lang Vei at dawn to report his findings to the camp commander. He headed straight for the TOC, or Tactical Operations Center. The TOC was an underground bunker that housed the camp's headquarters.
Sir? Me and my boys just got back from recon. Covering this area right here.
Captain Frank Willoughby, Lang Vei's commanding officer, was surprised by Thompson's report. In 20 years of conflict, the North Vietnamese had never used tanks in battle. A battalion of Allied Laotians arrived at Old Lang Vei, a smaller outpost at the bottom of the hill. This camp was run by Green Beret medics Sergeant First Class Eugene Ashley and Sergeant Richard Allen, who provided medical assistance to the troops. The Laotian battalion commander confirmed the Green Berets' worst fears.
I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Well, we got defeated in a tank battle with the North Vietnamese Army." And I kind of looked back through the ranks, and all these guys are wearing nice uniforms. There's no bandages. The weapons aren't banged up or anything. And I said, "Well, it doesn't look like you did too much fighting." And he said, "Well, you know, there was a bunch of them, and they had tanks."
Captain Willoughby contacted 5th Special Forces Command at Da Nang to report tank activity in the area. The Army was skeptical of the report. Nobody had ever seen the NVA use tanks.
I think the command element was very apprehensive of Green Berets, and we were going out in places where they didn't go, and we were reporting stuff that they didn't report and didn't see and didn't encounter, and I think there were some credibility questions on their part.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Shungle, a Special Forces commander, flew in from Da Nang to assess the situation. According to Lang Vei's executive officer, First Lieutenant Miles Wilkins, the camp was not equipped to battle tanks.
When you take that tracked vehicle, all of the stuff that's typically used to stop people from attacking you, claymores, concertina wire, you know, barbed wire all around your camp, all that type of stuff, is totally ineffectual against a tracked vehicle of that size. It just rolls over top of anything. If you're in a bunker, it can roll right over top of it.
As a precautionary measure, Captain Willoughby had 100 light anti-tank weapons airdropped into the camp. Known as LAWs, the experimental shoulder-launched rockets were portable and disposable. They could only be fired once. If there were tanks in the area, the Green Berets hoped the laws would be enough to stop them.
We had a bunch of laws, light anti-tank weapons. They'd never been used before against tanks. This was the first time in the history of the weapon that they were ever used. So we thought we were okay for a couple of tanks.
The laws were stashed in strategic locations throughout the camp. As the Tet Offensive threatened to engulf Lang Vei, the Green Berets remained on full alert. On February 6th, something or somebody tripped warning flares outside the camp perimeter. It might have been a false alarm. The flares were frequently set off by the wind or by wild animals. The men fired into the surrounding brush. They waited for return fire. There was none. Inside the TOC, Captain Willoughby and Lieutenant Wilkins heard an ominous rumbling. The ground began to shake. When the next trip flare went off, they were under attack.
I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I knew that there were searchlights coming toward us, which is unusual. We've never seen searchlights come at us.
The NVA attacked with surprising fury. The North Vietnamese, who usually relied on guerrilla tactics, now advanced behind Soviet-built tanks. The support unit stationed at Old Lang Vei was alerted by the firefight. Sergeant Ashley and Sergeant Allen scrambled into position. Even from a half-mile away, they could see the main camp was in trouble.
So all you can just see is the, the tracer rounds, the green versus red tracer rounds, and you're hearing people yelling and screaming. The bullets are whizzing everywhere. You can't sink low enough into the dirt. You just hear the cries of people being shot as they're crying out, and the explosions from the guns from the tanks. That's just mass chaos. It's like the picture of Dante's Inferno.
Inside the TOC, men armed themselves with the laws.
Jacksonville.
As the tanks stormed the camp, Lieutenant Paul Longrear tried to stop them with one of the shoulder-launched rockets. It misfired. Longrear feared the laws had been damaged when they were airdropped into camp. But these weapons were Lang Vei's only hope of fending off the attack. After 2 misfires, the third law fired.
You could actually see the tail of it go headed toward the tank, and it hit, boom, and instead of exploding and penetrating, went and shot straight up in the air. And that's when we looked at each other and said, uh-oh, something's wrong. And so that got the tank's attention because I hit near where the driver was. And so the tank stopped and went, started moving his main gun. And we said, hey, time to get out of this bunker.
Let's get out of here!
At Old Lang Vei, Sergeants Ashley and Allen watched in horror as the North Vietnamese tanks assaulted the main camp. If they didn't get reinforcements soon, Lang Vei was doomed. On February 6, 1968, enemy tanks attacked Lang Vei Special Forces Camp on the northernmost border of South Vietnam. Franklin Dooms radioed the Marine base in nearby Khe Sanh for help. The code word for Khe Sanh was Jacksonville.
Jacksonville, be advised we are under heavy attack. We have tanks inside the wire. Request illumination, over.
Lang Vei needed Khe Sanh to fire flares so they could target the tanks.
Illumination, over.
I called and stated that we have tanks in the wire and we need illumination. That was what they were asking for. Goes dead. Khe Sanh didn't answer. He got quiet. I don't know how much time had lapsed, but they came back and says, "Would you describe the vehicles?" And they were talking about the tanks, and I couldn't describe them. I didn't even know what they looked like other than a tank. You know, and of course, I was frustrated, and my dialogue at that time was, "We got tanks in the wire. That's all I can tell you. We got tanks in the wire. We need illumination."
So we have tanks inside the wire. I repeat, tanks inside the wire, over. Out.
I do not believe that Khe Sanh thought we had tanks.
Khe Sanh was also facing one of the largest attacks of the war. 3 NVA artillery divisions had surrounded the base. Enemy guns pounded them day and night. Still, no tanks had been spotted. It was hard for Marine commanders to believe the NVA would use tanks against a small camp like Lang Vei. As it turned out, even Lang Vei had underestimated the threat.
We didn't know how many tanks there were. We had so much confidence in ourselves, especially with the laws, that we thought it would be a cakewalk. We really anticipated 2 or 3 tanks at the most.
11 North Vietnamese tanks rolled right over the camp's perimeter defenses. With the laws misfiring, there was no way to stop them.
We never expected that many of them. But the tanks just overwhelmed us. Just overwhelmed us. They broke into the inner perimeter and they were firing back into our positions from behind. And we really didn't have anything to take them out with.
NVA infantry soldiers overran positions throughout the camp. Green Berets were dying and being taken prisoner. Siege troops were slaughtered at alarming rates. With the camp completely overrun, 8 Green Berets and a group of indigenous soldiers took cover in the TOC. The underground bunker was their only refuge from the mayhem. Inside the TOC, Captain Willoughby and his men tried to regroup.
They're inside the gate as we speak, behind the line. They're right here.
Lieutenant Wilkins and Colonel Shungle took up defensive positions outside the bunker. The colonel had only been in the camp a few days. The Army had sent him in to assess whether reports of NVA tanks were accurate. Now, Shungle had all the evidence he needed. The laws still weren't working. Hand grenades were their last resort.
And I threw one, and it landed right underneath the front track on the tank. It was close enough, didn't do much damage, but it apparently irritated him.
Shungle and Wilkins found themselves at the mercy of the NVA tank. One blast from its 76mm main gun left the front of the TOC in ruins. Shungle and Wilkins were hit. The NVA tank moved on, looking for new targets. The 2 officers emerged from the rubble, wounded but alive. 55-gallon drums filled with rocks had saved their lives. Smoke poured out of the TOC. Shungle and Wilkins believed the men inside must be dead. They searched for cover nearby before the next tank arrived. A short time later, Sergeant Thompson and his men worked their way through camp. The entrance to the TOC had been destroyed.
Oh, that was a mass grave. I saw that the minute I walked into it the first time. It was full of smoke, and I didn't want to be down there.
Thompson believed the camp commanders were all dead. He and his men quickly moved on. 8 Green Berets and a group of Siege soldiers were now trapped inside the bunker. The NVA returned, this time to finish off the TOC. They tried to crush it by rocking the heavy tank on the roof. If it broke through, there would be no hope for the men inside. The concrete and steel bunker was built to withstand artillery, but there was no way of knowing whether it would stand up to the enormous weight of a tank. The tank crushed the main radio antenna and knocked out communications. The men in the TOC were now cut off from the outside world. Without the radio, they would be unable to contact Khe Sanh or old Lang Vei. Once Thompson realized there were men alive in the TOC, he rallied his SIDS troops for a counter-assault.
There was a group of people at the old camp. There was a group of people underground trapped in this bunker, and the rest of us running around on the outside. So we had to pretty much do things on our own, you know, take the situation in hand.
Thompson went after the tanks. He fired a total of 4 laws at point-blank range. The tank continued to advance. The 5th hit was too much for the tank to absorb.
We'd see a problem and come together as a group and try to deal with it, you know. But we just didn't have the resources.
Outmanned and outgunned, Thompson and his troops were forced to fall back and regroup. The men in the TOC were stranded. In the wake of the Tet Offensive, a U.S. Special Forces camp at Lang Vei was overrun by NVA tanks. 8 Green Berets and a group of indigenous soldiers were trapped inside the Tactical Operations Center, or TOC. With communications cut off and facing overwhelming odds, they knew their survival depended on holding the bunker overnight.
We thought that if we could hold out to daylight, that a reaction force would come. We thought the Marines would send a reaction force, that aircraft would come in, and that the NVA would pull off of the hill. They always have. In the past, they've overrun camp after camp after camp, and they've always left.
In the meantime, the men in the TOC had to fend for themselves.
You two up there, Marlin, hold down!
Captain Willoughby sent Sergeant Early and Specialist James Moreland up to the TOC's observation tower to man the 50 caliber machine gun. Both Green Berets were badly wounded. Specialist Moreland sustained a serious head wound. Sergeant Early's legs were so mangled he couldn't walk. Medical supplies in the bunker were limited, and there was no way to get the wounded men out. Their only option was to hang on until daylight.
My decision was that, okay, you know, the battle's over. We've gotten our rear ends kicked, and we'll stay here, and in the morning the enemy will have to leave because of our superior fire support, aircraft, air support, and we will hold the camp. That was basically all that was left to do.
The Green Berets set up the machine gun and aimed it at the only entrance to the TOC. But the NVA had no intention of leaving them down there. Lieutenant Min, the NVA commander, ordered his men to throw thermite grenades into the damaged entrance of the bunker.
It's an incendiary grenade. It's hot. It's made to melt things. You can put it on an engine block and it'll burn right through the engine, drop out the bottom.
As a fire raged inside the bunker, the Green Berets swung into crisis mode. They immediately began destroying classified documents and secret encryption gear. There was more at stake here than their own lives.
If they'd have gotten the names of the agents that were supplying us information, it would have been a disaster. If they would have gotten information out of that talk, out of the safe, the people that they were paying for information, and the people that were working in villages and different places, they just go kill them.
By the light of the fire, Lieutenant Longrear helped to tend the wounded. It didn't look good. Without medical supplies, all they could do was control the pain. Outside the bunker, Colonel Shungle and Lieutenant Wilkins found cover under the dispensary. The camp was crawling with NVA. There was nothing they could do for the men in the top. While the men were below the floor, 2 NVA soldiers were walking above them, looting the dispensary.
The NVA were rummaging through the dispensary up above, looking for whatever, medical supplies or alcohol or whatever they might have found in there. And we just stayed quiet underneath there. We could hear the NVA troops, you know, walking around on the floor, which was probably only inches over our head.
After what seemed like an eternity, the soldiers moved on. Underground, the bunker's concrete and steel construction prevented the fires from spreading. The Green Berets endured the smoke and the heat. When the thermite grenades didn't work, Lieutenant Min ordered his soldiers to throw in tear gas. The Green Berets had prepared for this. During their extensive training, they had regularly been exposed to tear gas. Still, they fought to stay calm. The tear gas burned their eyes and seared their lungs.
I don't know how I stayed. Have you ever been in the gas chamber? If you've ever been in the gas chamber where they use gas and they throw gas in there, you won't stay in there without a gas mask. You'll leave. It's what they use to disperse crowds, and that's in the open. We were in a bunker.
For the SIDS troops, the tear gas was terrifying. They'd never been exposed to it before.
The ones that didn't have gas masks, the rest of them had to put, you know, their bandanas and lay down in the corner of the floor to breathe. And so then everything got real calm, and the North Vietnamese hollered down in there and said, if you don't surrender, we're going to blow the place up and kill everybody.
The SIDS soldiers panicked. They walked out of the bunker and surrendered to the NVA.
I'm not sure what went on upstairs. There was a lot of confusion. You could hear a lot of shooting and a lot of talking, a lot of screaming.
The South Vietnamese troops were shot as they surrendered. Troop strength inside the TOC was now reduced to just 8 U.S. soldiers. One was badly wounded and barely conscious. Another couldn't walk. Still, they refused to give up.
I really do not know how 8 people, all Americans, made a decision without anyone discussing it with anyone to stay in that bunker and die. But we decided, the decision was made without discussion that we were going to hang on, and we did.
There would be no surrender. If they had to, the Green Berets would fight to the last man. As the tear gas finally dissipated, a voice called down to them in English.
Yeah, we're here.
He says, anyone down there? And someone said, yeah, we down here. And then he asked a question, something to the effect, do you have weapons? And I mean, antennas go up all around when someone says you got weapons. That's a dumb question to ask someone. So someone at the end of the bunker come up with a comment.
Yeah, we got some. Come on down.
Probably teed them off, because it was shortly after that, probably a matter of maybe a minute or less, they started throwing grenades down that same hole.
The NVA switched from thermite to deadly fragmentation grenades. The Green Berets were blasted with white-hot shrapnel.
This guy throws a hand grenade in, and I holler, grenade! And I lean back behind the column, but I left my leg sticking out, not thinking, and a grenade hit me in the ankle. A fragment of the grenade hit me in the ankle.
And someone said, "Grenade!" And you know, everyone covers their head and hits the floor. We didn't have helmets or anything. And that thing goes wham! And when it went off, this hot shrapnel was flying everywhere. And they threw about 30 grenades or 40 grenades. I don't even know how many, but it was a lot of grenades over a period of probably an hour.
Wave after wave of grenades exploded in the confined space. The men bit back screams as shrapnel embedded in their flesh. They had to keep silent. They didn't want the enemy to know how many of them were still alive.
We didn't no longer have control of our camp. Communications was nil. I knew then that we were in bad shape. I didn't think I'd ever live through the night. I really didn't. I don't think anyone in there did.
Under the dispensary, Lieutenant Wilkins and Colonel Shungle reinforced their position. There was nothing they could do to help the trapped soldiers. With grenades exploding all around them, the men in the TOC would have to hold on until dawn. In early February 1968, the North Vietnamese Army overran the U.S. Special Forces camp at Lang Vei. The underground command bunker was surrounded. The 8 Green Berets trapped inside had survived tanks, thermite grenades, and tear gas. And yet they refused to give up. A half a mile away at Old Lang Vei, Sergeant Ashley tried to call in air support from Khe Sanh. But it was too dangerous for U.S. pilots to bomb Lang Vei in the dark. They would have to hold on until daybreak. Sergeant Allen rallied the Laotian troops for a counterattack on the camp at first light. Of the hundreds of Laotian soldiers at the camp, only 35 agreed to participate. It would have to be enough. But when dawn came, Lieutenant Min and the NVA did not retreat as expected. Since tanks and grenades had not forced the U.S. soldiers from the bunker, they would try something else. The NVA packed the ventilation shaft with C4 charges. C4 explodes with 100 times the force of TNT. The men in the bunker could hear the NVA working above ground, but they had no idea what they were up to.
Why we were trapped, we kept hearing this chinking upstairs, like it was like somebody digging with a bar. I thought they were repairing a tank because it was metal, and you could hear them clinking and clinking and clinking and clinking. This went on for hours, probably 2, 3, 4 hours.
The NVA had filled the ventilation shaft with bricks of C4. The explosion was enormous.
They set that thing off, and it picked everyone up and threw them across the bunker. I mean, everyone. That thing went off. It blew a hole in the bunker, a huge hole. It was unbelievable.
The C4 caused more damage than the tanks and grenades combined. Nearly all the Green Berets were knocked unconscious.
When I finally got my eyes open and there was dust and stuff in my eyes, I was looking around, I couldn't remember where I was. You know, I'd been hit in the head, and I guess I had temporary amnesia for a minute because I thought, where am I? You know, what's going on? And I could see that light coming, and all of a sudden, oh man, I remembered where I was.
The Green Berets had all survived the explosion, but now there was a gaping hole in the bunker. The men shook off the effects of the blast and used the light to their advantage. They searched the rubble for equipment, weapons, radios, anything that might have survived the explosion.
We scrambled through there with radios with bullet holes in them and shrapnel holes in them, and they were just total wreck. We found one radio with a bullet hole in it that we got a long antenna on it, and I came up on the air.
The battered field radio was just strong enough to reach the old camp and to communicate with the low-flying forward air control planes, or FACTs, in the area.
We were asking for the FACT to contact Khe Sanh and get a reaction force on the way. Sometime within an hour or two, he gave us the sad news, which, I mean, we were humble, that there would be no reaction force, and I mean, that your heart just sunk.
Heavy enemy anti-aircraft and artillery emplacements between Khe Sanh and Lang Vei made a rescue attempt impossible.
they've said it's a trap, that they're leaving you alive so that they will come to rescue you. And they said there's only 8 of you left alive, and it would kill more of them trying to come and get you.
As men, they were devastated. But as Green Berets, they understood that Khe Sanh's decision was a cold reality of war. The Marines were not coming. The NVA were not leaving. The men trapped in the bunker had but one hope left: their fellow Green Berets. At first light, Sergeant Ashley and Sergeant Allen deployed from the old camp with a unit of Laotian soldiers. Their radio reports gave hope to the doomed men trapped in the TOC.
We got a call from Eugene Ashley, Special Forces Sergeant who was with the Laotians, and he said, "I'm trying to fight my way to you. Be prepared to come out," and because they're putting all their attention toward me. So that redirected all of our energies. And fortunately, Ashley drew the enemy away from us being their only target.
Sergeant Ashley and Sergeant Allen led their men in a fierce firefight as they worked their way to the hill. Allen and Ashley were ready to move onto the TOC when they realized their Laotian soldiers had deserted them. Facing overwhelming odds, the two men retreated in a hail of bullets. Despite the setback, the men in the TOC rallied to the sound of Sergeants Ashley and Allen waging a two-man war on the NVA.
I can hear him on the radio, and a lot of firing going on. He said, "We'll be back."
Ashley retreated to the old camp. Now that it was light out, he could call in airstrikes over Lang Vei. U.S. planes pounded NVA positions in Lang Vei. Still, the NVA refused to leave. They took cover. Ashley was unaware that Colonel Shungle and Lieutenant Wilkins were still hiding under the dispensary. The only thing protecting them from the onslaught was a thin sheet of plywood.
Plywood is not a lot of deterrent for the type of rounds they were using. And there were a bunch of cans of what were insect repellent that were stacked next to it, which had a patrol anti-base. We were concerned that it was going to hit those and the whole place was going to go up in fire. So that's when we decided to go out from underneath there.
Both men headed toward the old camp. Sergeant Thompson was on the opposite side of Lang Vei. He tried to fight his way to Ashley's position, but NVA troops were everywhere.
So we ran down through there, trying to loop around to get to the old camp. Well, we weren't having much luck. There were NVA kill teams were moving through. We saw that Ashley and those guys were trying to assault their way into the camp to, get the guys out of the bunker. We were just getting so much resistance, that we couldn't get down there quick enough.
Now that they had air cover, Sergeants Ashley and Allen launched another counterattack. Sergeant Allen insisted on taking point as they fought their way to the bunker. He knew Ashley had a wife and daughter back home.
So I started thinking about Ashley's child, and so I told Ashley, I lied to him, and I said, Ashley, look, you've got the radio. I said, so if I get hit, you can have me medevaced out of here. So I said, you stay behind me. As I bend down, I'm changing magazines in my BAR. I hear this round just kind of like whiz over my head, and Ashley just drops to the ground, just. And they hit Ashley in the chest, about where the button on his pocket was. My objective now had changed from saving some men in a bunker to saving this human being beside me.
Sergeant Allen got Ashley out of the line of fire. He called for a jeep to take the wounded soldier back to the old camp. There he could be medevaced to a MASH unit for treatment.
All of a sudden, some artillery rounds or probably cannon fire from the tanks start hitting on the old camp, and next thing I know, blows me up in the air, and I'm being tossed around like a rag doll, and I see Johnson go down.
Sergeant Johnson, the driver, was badly wounded. Now, instead of one gravely injured man, there were two. Alan knew he could only save one of them. The medic had to make a choice.
The rule book says that you're going to save the person who's most likely to survive.
Sergeant Johnson's wounds were grave, but less severe than Ashley's. Alan stabilized Johnson's breathing. By the time he made it back to Ashley, it was too late.
I guess my biggest regret, it's like trying to save the life of a comrade and you don't succeed. Not being able to save somebody's life, that's what I've carried with me all these years.
News of Ashley's death hit hard. The brave sergeant had given his life for his fellow Green Berets. Without Ashley, Alan could not mount a counterattack on his own. Once again, the men in the bunker were left at the mercy of the enemy. As the Tet Offensive raged on, a massive U.S. aerial bombardment led by B-52s and strike aircraft thwarted the NVA attack on Khe Sanh. Six miles from Khe Sanh, a North Vietnamese tank unit still held Lang Vei Special Forces camp. 8 Green Berets had been trapped inside the camp's operations bunker for 14 hours. They were all wounded, some of them critically. General William Westmoreland arrived in Da Nang. The U.S. commander authorized air support for Lang Vei and helicopters to evacuate the camp's American personnel. Colonel Shungle and Lieutenant Wilkins had made it to the old camp, a half-mile from the TOC. The colonel was now able to order airstrikes on Lang Vei's coordinates. He needed to move fast. The trapped men were running out of time. Lieutenant Longrear had had enough.
I said, that's it. I'm going up top of the ground and die like a man. I had 19 bullets. I was going to kill 18 people and then myself, because I was not going to be captured. Okay, that's the reason I counted my bullets. So to me, it's immaterial. I didn't care if they had a plan or didn't have a plan. We weren't going to live. We were dead men.
I'm going up.
Lieutenant Longrear's decision galvanized the men. If they were going to die, at least they'd die fighting. Colonel Shungle was advised of their decision.
Shungle was a tremendous combat soldier. He said, look, if you guys are determined to come out, we're going to have the airplanes continue to drop bombs for 3 passes. They'll pass over 3 times. Then they're going to continue to pass over dry runs.
The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Despite their wounds, the men would have to make it to Old Lang Vei, a half-mile away.
And I had real reservations about that. I was not in. If I'd have had a vote, I don't believe I'd have voted for that. I might have waited for dark. I'm not sure what I wanted, but it took a lot of intestinal fortitude to crawl out of that hole and run across that hill with machine guns up there.
A-1 attack aircraft took to the skies. The World War II airplanes flew low and slow, allowing for more precise targeting of ordnance and machine gun fire. Lieutenant Min and his troops ran for cover. The aircraft made 3 heavy bombing and strafing runs. As predicted, the enemy was forced to take cover. The Green Berets inside the TOC prepared to evacuate.
We're gonna make a run for it.
Their chances of making it across the hill were slim. Soldiers who could still walk helped the wounded. They would be forced to leave Specialist Moreland behind. The young Green Beret had succumbed to his wounds. The men could tell by the noise overhead that the attack aircraft were ready to make their first dry run. Then it was up and out. Lieutenant Longrear took the point.
And I'm looking to see if there's any enemy soldier moving around out there. I don't see any, but then all of a sudden, for some reason, I become aware of this airplane. And these A-1Es are very slow and very low. I mean, they drop their ordnance in your spit can if you've got one. And I look up, just because of the noise. I looked right into the eyes of that pilot, and he leaned over and looked out his cockpit at me and smiled and dipped his wings. And he gave me a rejuvenation of I was no longer guaranteed a dead man. I now at least had a chance.
A chance was all he needed. Thanks to the airstrikes, enemy presence near the TOC was light. As the Green Berets made their way toward the old camp, Longrears scouted for hazards. Shungle had pre-positioned a truck at the edge of the old camp.
Get in. We're good. Go.
The men rushed to choppers parked on the old camp's landing zone. NVA tanks and infantry moved in on the landing zone. Sergeant Thompson brought up the rear, struggling to make it to the helicopter. A mob of terrified Laotians clung to him, holding him back. The Laotians wanted to be evacuated, but there wasn't enough room on the choppers.
And the logic behind that was that they would make an extra effort to get an American out of there. And if they had a hold of me, they'd go too. So I couldn't move, plus my back was hurt. So I missed the pickup ship by about 50 feet.
The helicopter pilot offered to land again.
Copy 255, abort!
Thompson said no. It was too late. The NVA had already overrun the landing zone. Sergeant Thompson was captured and taken prisoner. He spent 5 years in a North Vietnamese POW camp. 2.5 of those years were spent in solitary confinement, remembering the friends he lost at Lang Vei.
I saw some of the finest soldiers I've ever seen in my life up there. It was a defining moment in my life. And oddly enough, I'm kind of glad I was there. And I'll probably be there for the rest of my life.
In the Battle of Lang Vei, both sides paid a heavy price.
Every man on that hill, not one person broke and run. And when we were trapped in that bunker, there was 8 people in there with no means really to resist, and we resisted, and we stayed in there with gas, hand grenades, demolition charges. We just did it because that's the kind of people we are.
It was the resolve of the Green Berets under fire that kept them alive.
Just getting the job done. You're there, you're assigned a responsibility. You know going in that sometimes your responsibilities are going to have to be accomplished under stressful situations. So it wasn't up to me to decide that this was a good day or not a good day to take care of my job, but it was my day to do my job.
Of the 24 Green Berets at the camp, 7 were killed or listed as missing in action. 3 were taken POW. 14 made it out alive. Over 200 South Vietnamese and indigenous troops were killed. During the Tet Offensive, enemy losses were staggering. 37,000 North Vietnamese lay dead, including most of the Viet Cong's best fighters and political organizers. Many more were wounded and captured.
They realized that they cannot attack a force of professional soldiers because they're not capable of doing the things that need to be done to frighten or overpower the fighting spirit that professional soldiers have.
The American soldiers who fought off the invasion would never forget the lessons of Tet.
They used to say there's a special forces saying that says you've never lived till you've almost died. Life has an excitement that the protected will never know. It gives you an appreciation just for what life is.
For the Green Berets who survived the Battle of Lang Vei, life and duty have taken on new meaning.
Or light anti-armor weapon entered Army service in 1962. The law fires an armor-piercing rocket sealed within its telescoping tube. Once fired, the empty launcher is discarded. The law's shaped charge warhead can penetrate nearly 11 inches of armor.
North Vietnamese today assaulted the Special Forces camp at Lang Vei, near the Marine base at Khe Sanh, with Russian-made tanks. This was the first time the enemy has used armor in the Vietnam War. 5 of the tanks were destroyed by a force of 25 Americans and 400 Montagnards, who fought off the North Vietnamese in 12 hours. At least 11 Americans were killed. The Montagnard casualties are not known.
North Vietnamese troops, using tanks for the first time in the war, attacked the outpost of Lang Vei, defended by 24 Green Beret advisors and 400 Vietnamese militiamen. The Communists lost 5 of the Russian-made T-34 tanks, but they finally overran Lang Vei and occupied it for several hours. In early afternoon, they withdrew under the pressure of airstrikes and artillery from the Marine garrison at Khe Sanh, a few miles to the north. At least 13 of the U.S. advisors survived the attack. Lang Vei is a prime target for the North Vietnamese, though not an easy one. Carved out of hill jungles near the Laotian border last August, its deep bunkers were designed to withstand heavy enemy shelling. Lang Vei's
Moscow has been the leading supplier of war material to the communists, and Russian tanks like these that once paraded in Red Square tasted combat today near the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It happened near Khe Sanh. Using tanks for the first time in the war, communist forces today overran the strategic U.S. Special Forces camp at Lang Vei and then withdrew. 24 American Green Berets were forced underground as those Russian-built tanks and flame-throwing troops mounted the assault. 13 of the 24 Americans survived. 5 of the enemy's Russian-made tanks were knocked out. 1 of them left smoldering on top of the Allied command bunker. There was also a battalion of Laotian troops and more than 2,000 Laotian refugees at Lang Vei. All had been driven from Laos by North Vietnamese 2 weeks ago, and there's no word on what happened to them.
Today, the Americans gave up the Lang Vei Special Forces camp 4 miles west of the base after a brutal siege in which 10 of 24 Special Forces men and several hundred Montagnard irregulars were killed. Later, the enemy rushed a hill near the Khe Sanh base and was repulsed with heavy losses.
The Vietnamese man on the tank I met earlier, his name is Saul, about 22 years of age. He spoke a little bit of English, very little, but very helpful.